The National Desk, America's News Now.
The courtroom drama begins with cameras rolling. The case against Donald Trump and 18 co-defendants has its first showing in what could be a long extended trial.
I don't think we can take for granted that these would both be two equally 4-month-long trials. I think it could easily be twice that.
COVID cases are on the rise, and schools across the country have to decide if they need to return to policies of old. Plus, to strike or not to strike, the clock ticking down as United Auto Workers reissue their threat. We'll bring you the very latest. This is the National Desk, America's News Now. I'm Amira David. Let's begin with breaking news. We're just learning Special Counsel David Weiss, the man investigating Hunter Biden, intends to seek an indictment against the first son by the end of the month. The exact charges have not yet been disclosed, but court documents indicate it could be related to the gun charge that was part of the plea deal that fell through. Hunter is also under investigation in relation to his business dealings. And a federal judge has just ordered Texas to move the large floating barrier of orange buoys from where they're currently located in the Rio Grande to the riverbank. Republican Governor Greg Abbott put them in place to curb the flow of migrants at the border. The buoys have faced lots of backlash and legal challenges. Texas will likely appeal the decision. We move now to the latest in this record-breaking heat wave impacting several states. More than 96 million Americans under heat alerts today in the Northeast and parts of the South. Some schools adjusting their schedules again today in response. Yesterday, several temperature records were broken in the D.C. area. All three major airports reached 99 degrees, setting daily records. And more scientists are now saying this summer has been the hottest on record. Data released today by the EU Climate Change Service shows the average temperature from June to August beat previous records. And turning the heat up even further in Pennsylvania is the manhunt for escaped killer Danilo Cavalcante, which is now in its 7th day. Authorities this afternoon revealing the shocking video of how the convict really scaled those prison walls to escape from the exercise yard at Chester County Prison. And here's what we know right now. 2 suburban Philadelphia school districts remain closed this evening, along with the Botanical Gardens. He was spotted in on Monday night, and Cavalcante, who had just been sentenced to life in prison for the 2021 murder of his former girlfriend, has been spotted several times over the last few days on various surveillance cameras. Authorities have urged residents in those areas to remain indoors as they expand their search perimeter.
I think that it's a very challenging area. I think we've had a number of these types of searches in the past. Some take hours, some take days, some take weeks, and some take months. We're committed to the search, and we will find him.
The acting Chester County warden today responding to criticism of failed security measures at the facility. Cavalcante now the 2nd inmate to escape just this year.
Well, we believe the security measures we had in place were sufficient. They've proven otherwise, and we move quickly to enhance our security measures.
The warden says engineers came yesterday to develop proposals for better security. The reward for a tip that leads to Cavalcante's capture has increased to $20,000. And now to Georgia, where we are getting our first look inside the Fulton County courtroom today as Judge Scott McAfee denied the motions by co-defendants Kenneth Chesborough and Sidney Powell to be tried separately. Both of them will now be tried together starting October 23rd for what could be a lengthy trial, according to state prosecutors.
We will contend that a trial of these 19 co-defendants will take 4 months. And that does not include jury selection. In terms of the number of witnesses, they're in excess of 150 witnesses that the state intends to call.
Judge McAfee is giving the state until Tuesday to make their case as to why the other 17 co-defendants need to be included in the October trial, but he is not yet convinced.
It sounds like the state is still sticking to the position that all these defendants should remain, and they want to address some of these removal issues. I'm willing to hear that. I remain very skeptical.
Meanwhile, in Florida, we learned today Mar-a-Lago IT worker Yusil Taveras has agreed to cooperate with the special counsel in its prosecution of former President Donald Trump and his co-defendants Walt Nauta and Carlos de Oliveira. We learned from court documents that this deal came after Taveras was threatened with prosecution. Taveras was known as Trump employee number 4 in that indictment. And more bad news for Trump today. Trump found liable for defamation. A district judge ruled that comments the former president made in 2019 against writer E. Jean Carroll were in fact defamatory. The judge sided with Carroll's lawyers who argued because Trump lost his sexual abuse case brought by Carroll, any comments he made about the allegations were definition defamatory. A January trial date previously set will now only be about how much Trump has to pay in damages. In Colorado, another lawsuit has materialized with Donald Trump as the subject. A Washington-based watchdog group has filed a suit to bar the former president from the primary ballot, arguing he is ineligible to run due to the 14th Amendment. Section 3 of the 14th Amendment disqualifies candidates from running who have supported an insurrection. Similar lawsuits have been filed in other states, but this is the first to have been filed by an organization with significant legal resources. And should there be conflicting rulings, experts say it could escalate to the Supreme Court. Today, Trump's legal team dismissed the lawsuit, calling it an absurd conspiracy theory and political attack. And now to politics and some red flags cropping up for President Biden's re-election efforts. Some key voting groups that have traditionally helped Democrats on Election Day aren't exactly enthused. And while that could be a problem for any politician, Biden may have more reason to worry than others. Chief political correspondent Scott Thuman reports.
For President Biden, a need to turn things around. Democrats alarmed by the potential Biden-Trump matchup may be nervous based on new numbers. A series of New York Times Siena College polls over the last year show Biden leads Trump by just 53% to 28% among registered non-white voters, a marked deterioration in Biden's support compared with 2020 when he won more than 70% of non-white voters. Enough to make the difference between keeping the White House or handing the keys back to his predecessor, should they be the nominees.
Young voters, young Black and Latino voters, they're not ready to come back to the party. They're not even looking at the so-called messaging that's being sent to them about the economy, about climate change, about student debt relief.
Biden constantly trying to shore up support among skeptics.
Your generation will not be ignored, will not be shunned, will not be silenced.
Biden appointing America's first Black female Supreme Court justice, White House press secretary, and of course partnering with the first Black vice president. And Biden chose the first Latino to head the Department of Homeland Security. But election hopes go hand in hand with turnout. Having support is one battle, getting people to vote is another. According to roll call, Black voters posted an almost 52% participation rate in 2018, but only 42% cast a ballot in 2022.
Right now, things have changed for Black America. And I think what Black folks are saying, we're choosing our pocketbook. So I'm not saying that the Republican is going to get a surge of Black voters, but I do think either Black voters are going to turn to a different party or they're going to stay at home.
The New York Times analysis indicating that those polls show that Biden could very well re-energize that group of voters that he still needs to win the election. But even then, to get to his standing that he held in 2020, it may be difficult to meet that mark, Amira.
And Scott, you talked about how small changes can be a huge difference maker here. So how close is a projected race as of right now?
Well, numbers that came out just in the past week show 46% Biden, 46% Trump in a potential matchup. Those are obviously very narrow margins. There's no real room for error, but it also just goes to show you that even though there's a lot of time, Amir, between now and Election Day, it could be a nail biter all the way.
Yeah, it is a tight race, or at least looking to be one as of right now. Scott Thuman in Washington, D.C., thanks as always. Armed and dangerous. Michigan authorities are looking for a suspect who shot at police cruisers with a rifle and set them on fire early this morning. The suspect is now on the run. He's described as a white male wearing camouflage, last seen driving a silver Honda CR-V. Luckily, no troopers were in the vehicles at the time. Anyone with information is urged to contact Michigan State Police. A recent uptick in viral cases are making school districts rethink their COVID protocols with school back in session. Schools in Kentucky and Texas already have had to both cancel days and use virtual classes because of a high rate of illness. Philadelphia schools updated their safety plan, making all students isolate for 5 days after a positive COVID test before returning to school. And some schools in Alabama and Maryland have reinstituted indoor mask mandates. Kayla Gaskins has more.
Elementary school kids and staff are back in masks in a Maryland suburb outside Washington, D.C.
There's no reason a healthy child should have to wear a mask.
The 10-day mask mandate going into place at one elementary school after a handful of kids reportedly tested positive for the virus. The First Lady also testing positive earlier this week. The White House says she's quarantining in Delaware away from her husband.
Tested negative on Monday, tested negative on Tuesday, tested negative today. The president's going to continue to follow CDC guidance. And as I mentioned at the top, that includes masking, that includes testing.
The CDC still recommends anyone exposed to COVID-19 wear a mask for 10 days. Masks remaining a hot debate topic in light of studies showing they make little to no difference in slowing the spread of COVID-19.
The president tested negative, yet is still opting to wear a mask. What kind of message does that send?
It shows a lack of intellect, a lack of science. There's no reason he should be wearing a mask. How many times has he had COVID? He's had COVID 2 or 3 times. How many vaccines has he had? 5 or 6 vaccines. It sort of shows that he doesn't believe any of the things he's done so far are working.
When it comes to masking elementary students for COVID, critics of masking like Senator Rand Paul argue they do much harm and no good.
It's a disservice to children. It's harder for them to learn.
We conducted an unscientific online poll asking if people will comply with new mask mandates if they're implemented. As of Wednesday afternoon, more than 22,000 responded. 74% said no.
President Biden says he plans to ask Congress for more money to develop another new COVID-19 vaccine for the latest variants. This as the CDC is expected to release their latest guidance on boosters as early as next week.
The CDC director is expected to sign off on the new booster recommendations. The shots would be available soon after. On Capitol Hill, I'm Kayla Gaskins.
Kayla, thank you. Coming up, homelessness in America is on the rise even as federal spending to address the problem is dramatically increasing. We'll break down the numbers. Then another hurricane has formed in the Atlantic. The latest forecast in the area is likely to be impacted first. Plus, how parents in Maryland are reacting after their kids' elementary school banned snacks. We are back in just 90 seconds. The United Auto Workers reissued their threat to strike if any of the big three automakers fail to make a new deal on a new contract with the union. Union President Shawn Fain told the AP of the union's intentions, but also said some progress was being made. Ford has given the union a counteroffer, and the union and GM will meet tomorrow to discuss proposals for a new deal. Meantime, Stellantis, formerly known as Chrysler, has not engaged in new negotiations. The contracts for all three automakers end September 14th at 11:59 p.m. Americans are still skittish about jumping into a new house despite a slight dip in mortgage rates. According to the Mortgage Bankers Association, total applications for a new mortgage fell 2.9% last week. This despite mortgage rates for a 30-year fixed loan falling to 7.2% from 7.3%, and home prices have dropped considerably since their highs of last year. Homelessness in the U.S. is on the rise, even as federal spending to address the problem is dramatically increasing. The National Desk's Chris Daniels takes a closer look at the numbers.
If there is one cabinet secretary who tracks the data, it is Marcia Fudge.
It is a travesty that people in the greatest nation in the world sleep on the streets.
The Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, runs the agency that distributes billions every year for housing and shelter, and acknowledges homelessness across the country has gone up this year under her watch. Why is that number up?
The number is up very simply because all of the things that Congress, in its wisdom, put in place during the pandemic is gone.
There is data to suggest from USA Facts and HUD that homeless numbers declined dramatically since 2007 until creeping back up a few years ago.
We're seeing our shelters are full.
This even as federal spending dramatically increases. Mark Putnam of the Greater Seattle YMCA used to help distribute what HUD dubs Continuum of Care funding.
Most of those resources go toward long-term housing for people that are chronically homeless.
States receive big bucks in COC money every year, like more than $525 million in California in 2022, and the millions in Oregon, Washington, and Arizona. New York, Ohio, Texas, and Florida have all been big recipients in a package nationally that has grown every fiscal year, from $2.2 billion in 2019 to $2.8 in 2022 and $3.1 billion in 2023.
How do you make the argument that more money should be spent if the homeless rate has gone up with the levels of spending that there has already been?
It costs more to build housing, it costs more to operate housing, it costs more to pay staff.
Turning now to severe weather, Hurricane Lee has formed in the Atlantic and is likely to intensify into an extremely dangerous major hurricane by early Saturday. Lee could bring life-threatening surf and rip current conditions to the British and U.S. Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico this weekend. We will continue to monitor the latest developments on that for you. Time is almost up for Amazon. The FTC is planning to sue the online giant. Amazon's business practices, well, they've been under examination, including whether it favors its own products over competitors. FTC Chair Lena Khan testified before lawmakers in July.
That doctrine in some cases is 30 years, 40 years old, way before we had the advent of digital markets. These digital markets function differently, right? You have the self-reinforcing advantages of data, network externalities, companies face different incentives.
The lawsuit reportedly will suggest Amazon make changes that could lead to the company breaking up. Amazon claims the FTC did not lay out remedies for avoiding a lawsuit. The U.S. is sending more than $1 billion in new assistance to Ukraine amid its war with Russia. Secretary of State Blinken announced this today while visiting Kyiv.
Never go to someone's home without bringing a housewarming gift. We come bearing some further assistance for Ukraine across multiple areas. But that assistance doesn't actually mean anything unless it is used effectively. And so many of you every single day are working closely with our Ukrainian colleagues to make sure that the assistance we're providing is being used effectively and is being used properly.
Meantime, the UK says it's going to declare Russia's Wagner mercenary group a terrorist organization. Wagner conducted an army mutiny against Russia's top military leaders in June. Britain's government says Wagner is a threat to global security. The U.S. wants a Tennessee company to recall about 52 million airbag inflators, claiming they are defective. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration says ARC Automotive, Inc. is responsible for at least 2 deaths and 7 injuries. ARC refused a full recall, so now the NHTSA is scheduling a public hearing for the next month to try and get a court-ordered recall. If you've recently sought medical care but don't feel like you're being heard, well, you may be experiencing what's called medical gaslighting. Medical reporter Liz Bonus explains.
Medical gaslighting describes when medical professionals dismiss or downplay a patient's symptoms or attribute them to something else. Those who track these medical trends say it's especially likely to happen to women and people of color.
It's not likely due to race or gender, according to Renee Mahaffey-Harris of the Center for Closing the Health Gap, but rather perhaps perceptions or biases, she says, that may include certain populations, such as those who are overweight or obese.
We're really talking about what people experience by not feeling heard or coming with symptoms and not necessarily being diagnosed immediately, but learning later that they may have a form of cancer or that they may have a cardiovascular disease that just wasn't diagnosed because sometimes those bias get in the way of hearing the patient.
Other examples include women being told physical symptoms are all in your head, or women not being given the same medications as men when they are in pain, or even one population waiting longer for intervention or treatment than another. So here's what to know.
You can only control you. You can't control the system you walk into or the doctor's office you walk into or the amount of time you're going to have. So make sure that you are prepared with questions that you've already answered written down, so that the more that you can inform that physician, the more hopefully we can reduce that bias or that feeling of you not being heard.
Renee also says if you feel like you have taken these steps and you've not had positive results, don't be afraid to reach out to your healthcare facility and ask if you can be assigned to another provider, which often provides the same type of care. I'm medical reporter Liz Bonus. Back to you.
Good advice there, Liz. Thank you. Coming up, why an elementary school in Maryland banned snacks and how parents are reacting. We have reporters all across the country in your neighborhoods covering issues that matter most to you. We're taking the pulse of America. Many Seattle drivers are frustrated with a growing graffiti problem along I-5, and a video on social media shows a tagger allegedly using a state-owned lift to reach and tag the interstate. An official says it's illegal to operate their equipment and trespass in their work zone. State Transportation Department officials say they're cleaning it up, but often it will reappear.
They're working, even though it seems like there might not be removals, we're removing.
Officials say offensive language and hate speech gets priority and is removed as soon as possible.
I actually had to prepare her to go 5 or 6 hours without eating.
Piney Orchard Elementary School sent out this letter after the first day of school saying they've decided to implement a snack-free learning environment.
We were sending emails saying the school was banning snacks for all grades.
Melissa Posey says her daughter Elizabeth started kindergarten this year with the snack bag that the school gave out. But this week, a letter said the school is moving towards a snack-free classroom. The letter states they're working to provide an allergy-free environment.
This is something the principal decided without really giving reasoning.
We reached out to Anne Arundel County Public Schools about this decision, but so far, no response. Posey said hundreds of parents hope they reconsider.
In Charleston, West Virginia, at least 14 cars were damaged in a fire outside of a hospital. This started when a power line broke. It also caused power outages for hundreds of residents. Appalachian Power said it's working with the owners of the damaged vehicles. And coming up, multiple asteroids are flying by Earth this week. When we come back, how big of a threat they pose. He won in court to return to the sideline. His team won on the field Friday night in his first game back. And now the praying coach, Joe Kennedy, is walking away in an effort to advance his fight for more freedoms across the country. He said, "I believe I can best continue to advocate for constitutional freedom and religious liberty by working from outside the school system." So that's exactly what he plans to do. 5 asteroids are flying past Earth in the next week, starting today. NASA says 1 is the size of a bus, 1 the size of a house, and 3 as big as a plane. The house-sized asteroid is the one that's nearing the planet today, but NASA says they don't pose a threat because none of them are over 492 feet. And boy, are we thankful for that. That does it for this edition of the National Desk. We do want to invite you to join us again this evening for more coverage on America's top stories. Just check your local listings for timing. I'm Amira David. Thank you so much for watching.